Burari is not the kind of place where people expect horror to unfold. It is a dense, ordinary neighborhood in North Delhi, full of narrow streets, parked scooters, small shops, and houses stacked close together, their balconies almost touching. It smells of dust, cooking oil, incense, and traffic. People here know each other by face, by routine. They notice who opens their shop on time, who goes to temple in the morning, who waters plants on the roof at dusk. It is a place built on familiarity. The house at number C10 does not stand out. It is a modest, three-story building, painted a pale color that blends into the street. The ground floor holds a grocery shop, opened every morning without fail. Above it live the members of the Chundawat family, a large, tightly knit household that has been part of Burari for decades. Neighbors know them as polite, religious, respectable. The kind of family that keeps to itself, but in a reassuring way. They greet people. They attend weddings. They perform rituals. They argue sometimes, like all families do, but never loudly, never in public. Nothing about them suggests danger. Nothing suggests instability. The Chundawats are many, but they function as one. At the center of the family's history is a man named Banish Chundawat, known to everyone as Babulal. He is the patriarch, the anchor. Years earlier, he moved the family from Rajasthan to Delhi, slowly building a life through persistence and control. He opens the shop every morning. He manages money. He expects discipline. His authority is quiet but absolute. When Babu Lal speaks, the family listens. He has two sons. The elder, Lalit, is thoughtful, reserved, often described as inward-looking. The younger, Pratibha's husband, is more practical, more visible in daily interactions. There are daughters-in-law, grandchildren, an unmarried daughter, and an elderly mother. 11 people in total live under the same roof, sharing meals, prayers, obligations, and expectations. It is not an unusual arrangement in India. Joint families are common, especially among those who value tradition. Privacy is secondary to unity. Individual desires are folded into the collective good. Decisions are discussed, but hierarchy is understood. Every morning follows the same rhythm. The shop opens. Tea is made upstairs. Someone lights incense. Someone else folds laundry on the roof. Children go to school. Adults leave for work or stay to manage the home. In the evenings, they gather again. They eat together. They pray together. Faith is not dramatic in this household. It is woven into the fabric of daily life. The Chundawats believe in rituals, auspicious days, fasting, and ancestral blessings. They visit temples. They keep idols in the house. They believe that order in the spiritual realm produces order in the material one. For years, this belief seems to serve them well. The shop does reasonably well. The children grow. The family avoids scandal. Neighbors admire their unity. Then, years before anyone notices something is wrong, the balance shifts. It begins quietly, with an accident that does not seem extraordinary at the time. Lalit Chundawat survives a motorcycle accident that nearly kills him. He is hospitalized. He struggles to speak afterward. For a while, he is withdrawn, fragile. The family worries. They pray. They believe he has been spared for a reason. When Lalit recovers, something about him is different. Not visibly. Not immediately. He still goes about his life. He still helps at the shop. He still participates in family rituals. But those close to him notice subtle changes. He becomes more introspective, more spiritual, more certain about things he once questioned. He begins to talk about guidance. At first, it is framed as intuition, a feeling. Then, slowly, it takes a different shape. Lalit starts to say that his deceased father, Babulal, communicates with him. That the family's patriarch has not left them, but watches over them, advising them. In a family already rooted in faith and reverence for elders, this idea does not sound outrageous. It sounds comforting. The voice, Lalit says, is calm, protective, precise. It offers instructions meant to improve the family's life, to protect them from harm, to correct small mistakes, to ensure prosperity. At first, the instructions are harmless. Wake up at a certain time. Perform prayers in a specific order. Avoid certain foods on certain days. The family listens. Why wouldn't they? The guidance seems to help. The household runs smoothly. Conflicts decrease. Lalit speaks with confidence, clarity. He appears stronger than before, almost renewed. Someone suggests writing the instructions down to avoid mistakes. Lalit begins keeping notebooks. They are ordinary school notebooks at first, filled with neat handwriting. Dates, instructions, observations. The voice is referred to respectfully, almost reverently. Over time, it gains a name, Bada Baba, the Great Father. The notebooks grow more detailed. They specify where people should sit during prayer, how many rotations to perform, what words to say, what time to begin, what mistakes to avoid. They stress obedience, unity, and discipline. The family complies. Not out of fear, but out of trust. This is important. At this stage, there is no coercion, no violence, no threat. The instructions are presented as care, as protection, as wisdom passed down from beyond. Over months, then years, the notebooks multiply. Dozens of them. They are kept carefully, hidden from outsiders, but shared within the household. The rituals become more elaborate, more precise. They take longer. They demand silence, concentration, and absolute adherence. Still, nothing appears dangerous. Neighbors see the same family, the same shop opening on time, the same polite greetings, the same calm. What they do not see is how slowly authority has shifted inside the house. Babulal, the living patriarch, is no longer the final decision maker. That role has moved quietly to the notebooks, to the voice that speaks through Lalit, to instructions that cannot be questioned because they are framed as divine, ancestral, protective. The family does not see this as surrendering control. They see it as alignment. By the time anyone outside notices that something is wrong, the structure inside the house is already complete. 11 lives moving in synchrony. One voice guiding them. One set of instructions overriding instinct. And above it all, the belief that obedience will be rewarded. The house remains quiet. The shop continues to open every morning. Burari continues to wake up, unaware that inside C10 reality has begun to narrow slowly, carefully, toward a single night that will leave the entire country asking how a family could follow order so faithfully that it led them into silence. And if you had stood outside that house in Burari in the weeks before everything happened, you would have seen nothing you could point to as a warning. You would have seen children coming and going, school bags bouncing at their sides. You would have seen women on the balcony, shaking out bed sheets, dusting mats, calling to each other over the street noise. You would have seen Babu Lal in the shop, weighing out rice and lentils, bagging up flour, counting change with the automatic precision of someone who has done it for years. You would have seen a family that looked almost old-fashioned in its togetherness, a family that did not splinter the way so many households in a city can. That normalness is what makes the later photos so hard to look at, because it tells you something about evil that people often refuse to accept. Sometimes it doesn't arrive as violence. Sometimes it arrives as routine. Inside the Chundawat home, the rituals did not explode into existence overnight. They grew like a vine. One new instruction added to another. One small correction folded into the next. The kind of gradual change that feels, from the inside, like improvement. When Lalit began speaking about his father's presence, it landed softly because grief was still a living thing in that house. Babu Lal had been a strong figure, the kind of patriarch whose authority doesn't vanish when the body does. Even after his death, his preferences and rules lingered. Families like this do not simply move on. They carry the dead with them in daily decisions. So when Lalit described guidance from beyond, it did not feel like a break from reality. It felt like continuity. It felt like Babu Lal still doing what he always did, keeping the family in line. And Lalit, in the years after his accident, had become the sort of person whose certainty could fill a room. People who had watched him struggle to speak, watched him rebuild himself, watched him return to daily life, were primed to see his change as a kind of miracle. That's the quiet power of survival. A person who comes back from near death often carries an aura of meaning around them, even if they never ask for it. Others will assign meaning anyway. At first, the notebooks were not the center of the house. They were simply records. Helpful memory aids. A way to avoid mistakes in prayer. A way to keep track of what worked and what did not. But written instructions have a strange authority, especially in families that prize order. Once something is written down, it stops being a suggestion and starts being a rule. Once it becomes a rule, people become afraid of breaking it. And once people are afraid, they stop asking why the rule exists. The notebooks began to shape the household's internal logic. If the family had a disagreement, the resolution could be found by returning to the instructions. If the business had a bad week, the reason might be that a ritual had been performed incorrectly. If someone fell ill, it could be because someone else had disobeyed without meaning to. The notebooks did not merely guide behavior, they became a way to explain life itself. And in that sense, they offered something seductively powerful, a map. Life in a crowded city is uncertain. Money can slip away. Jobs can be lost. Illness can come without warning. Relationships fracture. And for families who fear chaos, the promise that the world can be controlled through obedience is incredibly comforting. If prosperity is connected to ritual precision, then failure is not random. Failure is fixable. You just have to do it correctly next time. The family's bond, which neighbors saw as warmth and unity, also contained a less visible element, pressure. In a household like this, the cost of dissent is not always violence. It can be disappointment, shame, the feeling of being the reason something goes wrong. If the family believes spiritual protection depends on everyone following instructions perfectly, then the person who questions the instructions risks being blamed for misfortune. It is difficult to overstate how strong that kind of invisible pressure can become, especially when it is wrapped in love. The women in the house were not passive figures, contrary to how outsiders sometimes imagine traditional families. They ran the home. They managed meals. They organized routines. They knew which child needed what, which elder needed medicine, which bill needed paying. But their strength existed inside a structure that valued harmony over confrontation. And harmony, in this house, increasingly meant following the notebooks. The men, too, were not mindless followers. They were adults, capable, working, social. They interacted with the outside world every day. The grocery shop required negotiation, customer handling, financial tracking. This wasn't a family sealed in isolation. That's what makes the story so difficult. They were integrated into society, not cut off from it. They simply had a second life, an internal world that outsiders did not see. If you were a neighbor, you might have noticed that the family was especially religious. You might have noticed extra incense on certain days, more frequent temple visits, occasional gatherings. But in Burari, that's not unusual. People consult astrologers. People perform pujas for business success, for health, for marriage. A family leaning into ritual does not stand out. It blends in. And the Chundavats, importantly, had something many families envy, a reputation that protected them. They were the kind of household people assumed was stable. When stability is assumed, warning signs are often dismissed as quirks. A neighbor might hear someone mention that Lalit had become very spiritual. That he had a special connection to his father. That the family was following certain disciplines. And the neighbor might nod and think, good for them, they are keeping tradition alive. What neighbors didn't see was how the notebooks changed over time. The handwriting stayed neat, but the instructions became more specific. Not just pray, but pray like this. Not just be united, but be united in this exact formation. Timestamps appeared. Sequences. Conditions. Checklists. The rituals began to include minor acts of self-denial framed as purification. Silence became important. The idea of secrecy became important too, not secrecy like wrongdoing, but secrecy like sanctity. Something special, something outsiders wouldn't understand. Once secrecy enters a belief system, it becomes harder to correct it from the outside. Because the people involved stop sharing details. They start protecting their practice. They interpret questions as threats. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the family's sense of authority shifts again. It moves away from discussion and toward compliance. If the notebooks say it, it must be done. If Bada Baba instructed it, questioning it is not just disobedience, it's disrespect toward the dead, toward the sacred. This is how a household can begin to operate like a closed circuit even while still living in a crowded neighborhood. The outside world continues normally. The shop continues normally. School continues. Weddings happen. Festivals happen. And inside, the circuit tightens. There are moments, years earlier, when the story might have turned. We can't point to them with certainty, but we can imagine them. A family argument that might have forced questions into the open. A doctor's visit where someone might have noticed something unusual. A relative who might have been invited inside and overheard a ritual instruction that felt too strict. But even if such moments occurred, they didn't break the circuit. The family's unity held. Their respectability held. Their belief held. And belief, once it becomes a system, has its own momentum. By 2018, the Chundawat family is still planning for the future like any other household. There are discussions about marriage, about finances, about improving the shop, about stability. They are not behaving like people preparing to die. They are behaving like people trying to live better. That detail matters because it's the reason the case shook India so deeply. It didn't look like despair. It didn't look like a crime in the usual sense. It looked like a family continuing forward until it suddenly stopped. Much later, when investigators will finally read through the notebooks in full, they will realize that the rituals were not simply about worship. They were about control. Control over health, over wealth, over fate. Control over fear. And the more control the notebooks promised, the more the family relied on them. The more the family relied on them, the less room there was for doubt. The less room there was for doubt, the harder it became for any one person to say, quietly, even to themselves, "This is not normal." When people ask how something like Burari can happen, they often imagine a dramatic turning point, a sudden plunge into madness. But in many real-world cases of group belief and coercive influence, the turning point is not a plunge. It's a slope. A slow incline you don't notice until you're too far up to turn around without admitting you were wrong. And inside that house, the climb continued, day by day, in the soft language of devotion. The instructions were framed as care. The discipline was framed as love. The secrecy was framed as protection. The discomfort was framed as purification. The family was told, in writing, in routine, in repetition, that this was how they would be saved. So the house remained quiet. The street remained busy. The grocery shop remained open. And behind the ordinary walls of C10 the notebooks accumulated like layers of snow. Each one thin on its own, each one seemingly harmless, until the weight of all of them together became something no one inside could lift. The shift in Lalit Chundawat did not announce itself with drama. There was no moment when the family gathered and acknowledged that something fundamental had changed. Instead, the change crept in the way habits do, through repetition, through small reassurances, through the relief of believing that someone finally knew what they were doing. After his accident, Lalit was treated gently. People listened to him more closely. They noticed when he spoke with certainty. And when he began to describe the presence of his father not as a memory but as a voice, the family did not recall. They leaned in. In families shaped by hierarchy and reverence, the dead do not disappear. They transform into reference points. You still ask what they would have wanted. You still fear disappointing them. When Lalit said that Babu Lal was guiding him, the idea slid easily into place because Babu Lal had always guided them when he was alive. Authority did not feel misplaced. It felt preserved. What made Lalit's role powerful was not volume or force, but calmness. He did not shout. He did not threaten. He did not demand obedience. He explained. He reassured. He spoke as someone relaying instructions, not inventing them. That distinction mattered. It allowed him to remain a messenger rather than a leader, even as the family increasingly reorganized itself around what he said. The notebooks became the physical proof of this authority. Written words carry weight in a way spoken words do not. Once instructions were recorded, they could be checked, corrected, refined. The family began to refer back to them, not just for ritual accuracy, but for guidance on daily life. If something went wrong, the answer might be found in what had been written before. At some point, the instructions stopped being retrospective and became anticipatory. They did not just explain why something had failed, they began to outline what must be done next. What posture to hold. What time to begin. What silence to maintain. The language remained measured, but the precision increased. Precision is seductive. It promises that if you follow every step exactly, you will arrive safely on the other side. The notebooks began to emphasize unity above all else. The idea that the family must act as a single body. That one person's doubt could weaken everyone. That obedience was not just personal but collective. These ideas did not arrive as threats. They arrived as warnings framed in concern. If one person faltered, the family might suffer. If one person questioned, protection might weaken. This logic quietly rewired responsibility. It made individual discomfort less important than collective outcome. It made silence virtuous. It made compliance a form of love. And because the family loved each other deeply, this logic worked. The women of the household, often portrayed in the media later as passive victims, were active participants in maintaining order. They organized rituals. They memorized steps. They corrected each other gently. Their labor kept the system running. But they operated inside a structure where questioning spiritual authority felt dangerous, not rebellious. The men, too, adapted. The elder Babu Lal, still alive at this point, did not openly challenge Lalit's role. Whether out of belief, exhaustion, or trust, he allowed the notebooks to speak where once he would have. Authority did not disappear, it migrated. The children grew up inside this system. To them, the rituals were normal. The silence was normal. The emphasis on correctness was normal. When belief is inherited rather than chosen, it feels like air, invisible and unquestioned. Outside the house, life continued. The shop thrived modestly. The family attended social functions. There were plans for weddings. Conversations about the future. Nothing suggested withdrawal from reality. This is one of the most critical misunderstandings about the Burari case. The family was not isolated. They were integrated, functional, and outwardly stable. Which means that whatever was happening inside the house was not the result of being cut off from the world, but of creating a parallel logic within it. Over time, the notebooks introduced an idea that would later become central, that suffering, when endured correctly, was not punishment, but transition. That discomfort was temporary. That the body could be tested without being harmed. That faith, when absolute, would prevent death itself. These ideas were not written as explicit promises. They were implied, suggested, reinforced through repetition. Rituals involving controlled restraint. Instructions that emphasized trust over instinct. Trust the process. Trust the voice. Trust that protection is already assured. In psychology, this is the point where belief systems cross a threshold. When obedience is no longer about improving life, but about proving loyalty. when doubt becomes dangerous not because it is wrong, but because it threatens cohesion. And yet, from inside the house, it still felt like care. The notebooks were not frantic. They were orderly. They were calm. There were no expressions of despair. No talk of ending life. No farewell messages. Anyone reading them without context might interpret them as the writings of a devout household obsessed with ritual precision, not a family moving toward catastrophe. This is why so many people later struggle with the word suicide in relation to Burari. Suicide implies despair, isolation, a desire to escape pain. What happened in that house does not align cleanly with those ideas. There was no chaos, no violence, no impulsive act. There was preparation. Preparation framed as discipline. Discipline framed as devotion. Devotion framed as safety. In the final months, the rituals intensified. They became more complex, more synchronized. The idea of secrecy became stronger. Outsiders were not to know. Not because the family believed they were doing something wrong, but because sacred knowledge is often framed as something that must be protected from misunderstanding. This secrecy further reduced the possibility of intervention. No one outside the house knew enough to be alarmed. And inside the house, no one felt entitled to object. By June 2018, the notebooks contained instructions that were no longer just about prayer. They were about physical positioning, about binding, about covering faces, about remaining still. The language remained eerily calm, almost procedural. There was no alarm bell written into the pages. This is perhaps the most frightening aspect of Burari, that at no point did the family believe they were choosing death. Everything in the notebooks suggested the opposite. That this was a test, a passage, a ritual from which they would emerge cleansed, protected, and improved. They believed deeply that nothing irreversible was being asked of them. Faith had narrowed their understanding of consequence. And when belief narrows, instinct becomes quiet. The night approached without drama. There were no last calls. No messages. No unusual purchases. The grocery shop closed as usual. Dinner was prepared. The house settled into its evening rhythm. From the outside, it was just another night in Burari. From the inside, it was the culmination of years of instruction, obedience, and trust. 11 people prepared to follow the notebooks precisely, convinced that what awaited them on the other side of the ritual was not death, but deliverance. And the house, which had absorbed belief so patiently over time, was now ready to become its final expression. What makes this period so difficult to examine is that there is no obvious villain inside the house. No single moment where someone forces another person to comply. The power is distributed, diffused through belief, reinforced through repetition. Everyone is both participant and enforcer, not out of cruelty, but out of fear of being the one who breaks the chain. In families bound tightly by tradition, obedience is often mistaken for care. If the instructions exist to protect the family, then following them becomes an act of love. And once love is involved, resistance feels selfish. It feels like putting yourself above everyone else. This is how personal boundaries erode without anyone noticing. Each instruction followed successfully reinforces the next. Each ritual completed without consequence strengthens the belief that the system works. When nothing bad happens, obedience feels justified. When something good happens, a profitable week at the shop, a resolved argument, a moment of peace, it feels like confirmation. Confirmation bias takes over quietly. Any doubt that arises is explained away. If someone feels uncomfortable during a ritual, it is framed as purification. If someone hesitates, it is framed as lack of faith. If someone questions, it is framed as confusion that must be corrected gently, lovingly. And correction does not look like punishment. It looks like guidance. Lalit's role in this process remains strangely passive. He does not dominate conversations. He does not issue commands with urgency. He presents the notebooks as instructions that exist independently of him. This allows the family to obey the system rather than the man. It is far easier to submit to rules than to people. This distinction is crucial because it means no one feels coerced. When investigators later try to trace responsibility, they will find it slipping through their fingers. The notebooks are written, but not in a tone of authority. Lalit relays messages, but does not threaten. The elders consent. The younger members comply. Each person believes they are acting voluntarily. This is how collective belief systems trap people without chains. The rituals also provide a sense of purpose. They give the family a shared project. Something to do together that feels meaningful, elevated above the mundanity of daily life. In a crowded city where people often feel powerless, the idea that one household has discovered a way to influence fate is intoxicating. The house becomes a closed environment not because doors are locked, but because meaning is controlled. Inside C10 explanations for the world come from one source. Success, failure, health, fear all are filtered through the notebooks. Once a single interpretive lens dominates, alternative explanations fade. There is no room for coincidence. No room for randomness. Everything has intent. This belief system also removes fear of consequences. If suffering is part of a divine plan, then enduring it correctly guarantees safety. The notebooks emphasize trust again and again. Trust in the process, trust in Bada Baba, trust that the body will not be harmed if instructions are followed precisely. This is the belief that ultimately seals the family's fate. Because fear exists to protect the body. When fear is overridden by doctrine, instinct becomes an obstacle rather than a guide. Pain is reframed as illusion. Discomfort is reframed as necessary. Silence is reframed as discipline. The family rehearses obedience without realizing it. Small acts of restraint make larger ones possible later. Small sacrifices normalize bigger ones. Each ritual sets the precedent for the next. And because nothing catastrophic happens immediately, the idea that catastrophe is even possible fades from consideration. By the time the instructions reach their final form, the family's internal logic no longer recognizes danger as danger. What an outsider would see as an obvious red flag, an insider interprets as a test of faith. This is not ignorance. It is conditioning. And it is reinforced daily by the absence of contradiction. No neighbors intervene because they see nothing alarming. No relatives intervene because they are not fully aware. No authority intervenes because no crime has occurred. The system feeds on silence, and silence is abundant. The family's trust in the notebooks becomes absolute not because they are foolish, but because belief has replaced uncertainty. Uncertainty is uncomfortable. Belief is soothing. It offers answers, even when those answers are wrong. In the final weeks, the instructions become more ritualized, more synchronized. Everyone has a role. Everyone knows where to stand, when to move, when to remain still. There is comfort in this clarity. Anxiety decreases as the ritual approaches because ambiguity disappears. They are no longer guessing what to do. They are simply following. And this is the most chilling realization of all. By the time the night arrives, the family is not anxious. They are prepared. They believe they understand what will happen. They believe they are safe. The danger does not feel like danger anymore. It feels like order. In the months leading up to July 2018, the notebooks change in tone, though not in emotion. They remain calm, methodical, almost bureaucratic. What shifts is their scope. The instructions are no longer about correcting life, they are about completing something. The language becomes final without ever sounding fatal. Dates appear more frequently. Times are specified down to the minute. The rituals are no longer flexible. They must be done exactly as written. Silence is emphasized again and again. The importance of secrecy is reinforced, not because outsiders would interfere, but because misunderstanding could weaken the process. Sacred acts, the notebooks insist, lose power when observed by those who do not believe. The idea of collective participation becomes absolute. Every member of the family must be involved. No exceptions. Unity is no longer encouraged, it is required. The family is reminded repeatedly that protection only works when everyone complies. This is how dissent is neutralized before it can form. By reframing obedience as protection for others, the notebooks make resistance morally unacceptable. If one person refuses, they are not simply refusing for themselves. They are endangering everyone else. Love becomes leverage. Responsibility becomes a weight. The instructions begin to describe physical actions in detail. How the body should be positioned. How hands should be placed. How faces should be covered. These descriptions are clinical, almost detached, as if describing a medical procedure rather than a spiritual act. There is no mention of pain. No mention of danger. Only reassurance. The notebooks emphasize that this is not death. Again and again, they insist that the body will endure. That breath may feel restricted, but it will return. That fear may arise, but it must be ignored. That discomfort is temporary. That faith ensures survival. This belief does not appear suddenly. It is built on years of smaller rituals that required endurance. Standing still for long periods. Fasting. Maintaining silence despite discomfort. Each successful act reinforces the next. The family has already proven to itself that it can tolerate more than it once thought. By now, instinct has been thoroughly retrained. The family prepares quietly. There is no panic. No frantic behavior. No emotional outbursts. If anything, the house becomes calmer in the days before the ritual. Tasks are completed efficiently. Meals are eaten together. Conversations remain ordinary. Plans for the future are discussed casually. This is one of the most disturbing aspects of the case. The family does not behave like people preparing to die. They behave like people preparing to do something important. On the evening of 30th June, the house at C10 settles into its familiar nighttime rhythm. The shop downstairs closes as usual. Shutters are pulled down. Lights are turned off on the street. Neighbors retreat indoors. Somewhere nearby, televisions flicker. Someone argues. Someone laughs. Inside the Chundawat home, dinner is prepared and eaten. Dishes are washed. Children are guided through bedtime routines. Nothing appears rushed. Nothing appears unusual. The notebooks are followed carefully. At some point in the night, the family gathers. The instructions specify where each person should stand, how they should face, how they should bind their hands. Cloth is used. Dupattas, scarves, pieces of fabric that are ordinary in any Indian household. They are not instruments of violence. They are tools of ritual. The faces of 10 family members are covered. Their mouths are gagged lightly, not violently. Cotton is placed in ears. The instructions explain that this is to block distraction, to prevent outside influence, to maintain purity. One member of the family, the elderly matriarch, is instructed to lie on a bed in another room. Her participation is symbolic, not physical. The rest of the family positions itself according to the notebooks. Iron grills fixed to the ceiling become anchors. Cloth loops are tied carefully. The instructions emphasize that the knots must not be tight. That the body will not hang. That this is not hanging. This distinction is critical. The family does not believe they are hanging themselves. They believe they are performing a ritual that involves suspension without death. The notebooks insist that gravity will not claim them. That belief overrides fear. There is no struggle. No sign of resistance. No evidence of panic. The scene, when discovered later, will look eerily orderly. Almost symmetrical. 10 bodies aligned. Heads covered. Hands bound behind their backs. Feet barely touching the floor. From the outside, it will look unmistakably like suicide. From the inside, it is something else entirely. The ritual begins. Silence is maintained. Breathing becomes shallow. The body reacts instinctively, sending alarms through the nervous system. But instinct has been reframed as illusion. Fear is reframed as weakness. The notebooks have warned about this moment. They have prepared the family for the sensation of breath restriction. They have insisted that relief will follow if faith is maintained. Minutes pass. The body does not recover. One by one, consciousness fades. There is no intervention. The instructions have been followed precisely. When morning comes, the house does not wake up. A relative arrives later that day. The door is locked from the outside. This, too, will later be interpreted as suspicious, but at the time it simply suggests privacy. When the door is opened, the scene inside defies comprehension. 10 bodies hang from the ceiling in the living room. The room is silent. There is no sign of struggle. No overturned furniture. No broken objects. The notebooks lie nearby, neat, intact. The elderly matriarch is found in another room, dead on her bed. Police arrive. Forensic teams arrive. Neighbors gather in shock. The house fills with voices for the first time in hours. Investigators struggle to understand what they are seeing. The alignment of bodies suggests planning. The lack of resistance suggests consent. The absence of a suicide note complicates matters. The notebooks are eventually discovered, and when they are read, the tone unsettles even seasoned officers. There is no despair in the writing. No goodbye. No anger. Only instruction. Autopsies confirm death by hanging. There are no signs of external force. No evidence of third-party involvement. No drugs. No alcohol. The scene points inward, relentlessly. Psychologists later describe the event as a case of folie à famille, a shared psychotic disorder. But that term feels insufficient. It suggests madness spreading like a virus, when in reality what happened was belief hardening into certainty over years, not days. This was not sudden. This was built. The notebooks reveal that the family did not expect to die. They expected to wake up. They believed that Bada Baba would intervene at the final moment. That this was a test of trust, not an ending. The tragedy of Burari is not that a family lost hope. It is that they never believed they were in danger. They trusted the system more than their bodies. They trusted obedience more than instinct. They trusted certainty more than fear. And when certainty failed them, there was no space left for doubt to save them. What happens next unfolds slowly, not in the way news headlines later compress it, but in the way reality actually arrives, through hesitation, confusion, and the unbearable delay between seeing something and understanding it. The relative who first enters the house does not scream immediately. The mind resists what the eyes are reporting. 10 bodies, aligned, suspended, faces covered, it does not resemble anything the brain has a template for. The first instinct is not horror, but disbelief. A silent counting begins. 1, 2, 3. The numbers don't stop. Someone backs away. Someone reaches for a phone with shaking hands. The room smells ordinary. Incense residue. Dust. Stale air. There is no blood. No violence. No chaos. That absence makes the scene harder to process, not easier. When police arrive, they do not rush in shouting. They slow down. Officers trained to expect struggle find none. There are no overturned chairs. No marks of resistance on the walls. No sign that anyone tried to escape. The bodies are cold. Rigor mortis has set in. Time has already passed. The notebooks are found gradually, not all at once. One officer flips through a page and stops. Another continues reading and feels a tightening in the chest. The handwriting is neat. Consistent. The tone is instructional, almost tender. There is no panic in the words. That is what disturbs them most. This is not the writing of someone saying goodbye. It is the writing of someone giving directions. As forensic teams work through the house, they begin to understand the depth of preparation. Cloth has been measured. Knots have been tied deliberately. The ceiling grills are strong enough to bear weight. Everything suggests planning, but not desperation. Investigators talk quietly among themselves. Some believe immediately that this must be murder disguised as suicide. Others argue that no single person could have forced 10 adults into this arrangement without resistance. The absence of defensive injuries becomes decisive. Whatever happened here, everyone participated. This realization does not bring clarity. It brings dread. Outside, the street fills with people. Neighbors who greeted the family days earlier now stand in silence, craning to see something they cannot comprehend. News spreads rapidly. Cameras arrive. Words like cult and ritual appear almost immediately, flattening the complexity into something easier to digest. Inside the house, officers keep reading. The notebooks describe the final ritual with unsettling confidence. They reassure the participants that breath will return, that the soul will be purified, that fear must be ignored, that this is not death. There is no contingency plan written down. No what if. That omission becomes crucial. It means that once the ritual began, there was no framework for stopping it. No instruction for doubt. No permission to abandon the process if something felt wrong. The system was designed to move forward only. Psychologists later explain that once people commit to a belief publicly, especially within a close-knit group, the cost of backing out becomes enormous. To stop would require admitting that years of obedience had been misplaced, that the voice was wrong, that the sacrifice was meaningless. And in that house, meaning had become everything. Autopsies confirm that all 10 suspended family members died from hanging. There is no evidence of poisoning, no drugs, no sedatives. The elderly matriarch's death is attributed to natural causes, likely cardiac arrest. She died separately, quietly, while the rest of the house enacted the ritual. The official conclusion forms slowly, reluctantly. This was not murder. This was not external coercion. This was not an accident. This was collective belief carried to its irreversible end. When the story breaks nationally, India reacts with disbelief. Commentators argue over language. Suicide feels inadequate. Murder feels inaccurate. Ritual sacrifice feels sensational. Every term fails to capture what actually happened. Experts speak about shared psychosis, about charismatic authority, about the dangers of unquestioned belief. But explanations do not soothe the public. They only deepen the discomfort, because they suggest that what happened in Burari was not the result of rare insanity, but of common human tendencies taken too far. Trust, obedience, fear of dissent. The house becomes sealed. Police tape flutters where family members once stood. The shop remains closed. The street feels altered, as if something invisible has shifted. And inside the house, the notebooks remain calm, precise, unfinished. They do not end with tragedy. They end with expectation. In the days after the discovery, the house at C10 is sealed, but Burari itself cannot be contained. People come from neighboring districts. Some stand silently. Others argue. Rumors spread faster than facts. Every retelling distorts the shape of what happened, because language struggles to hold something that does not behave like a crime. Television once lined the streets. Reporters speak in lowered voices at first, then louder as the need for explanation overtakes restraint. Words like cult, black magic, and mass suicide dominate headlines, even as officials hesitate to commit to any single description. Inside the police station, investigators face a different problem. There is no suspect to interrogate. No timeline to reconstruct through witnesses. No phone records that lead outward. Everything leads back into the house. The notebooks become the center of the investigation. There are many of them. Dozens. When read in sequence, they reveal not a sudden descent, but a gradual tightening. Early entries are gentle, encouraging, almost mundane. Later entries grow more specific, more confident, more commanding though never aggressive. The tone remains steady throughout, as if certainty itself were the message. This consistency troubles psychologists. In many cases of delusion, language becomes erratic. Emotion bleeds into writing. Here, it does not. The notebooks read like instructions for assembling furniture or following a recipe. Calm, orderly, assured. That calmness makes it easier to understand how the family followed them and harder to accept the outcome. Investigators interview relatives, friends, shopkeepers, neighbors. Again and again, they hear the same thing: the family seemed normal. Religious, yes. Disciplined, yes. But not distressed. Not withdrawn. Not desperate. No one recalls arguments about death. No one recalls expressions of hopelessness. No one recalls signs of coercion. This absence forces authorities toward a conclusion that feels unsatisfying even as it becomes unavoidable. There was no crime in the conventional sense. The family was not killed by an outsider. They were not forced. They were not deceived at the final moment. They acted together, willingly, under a shared belief system that had replaced individual judgment. Psychologists describe it as folie à famille, a shared psychotic disorder where delusional beliefs spread within a close-knit group. But even that term feels incomplete. It implies a sudden infection, when what happened here was cultivated over years. Belief did not spread like fire. It settled like sediment. Layer by layer, instruction by instruction, doubt was replaced with certainty. The notebooks did not demand surrender all at once. They asked for alignment, then obedience, then trust. By the time the final ritual arrived, resistance no longer felt possible, not because of force, but because the mental cost of refusal had become unbearable. To refuse would have meant admitting that the voice was wrong, that the years of discipline were misguided, that the family's suffering had been unnecessary. For people who had built their entire sense of order around those instructions, that admission would have shattered everything. And so they did not refuse. The public struggles with this explanation. It feels too ordinary, too close. It suggests that the same mechanisms exist in many families, in many belief systems, only usually stopping short of catastrophe. People want something stranger, something safer to distance themselves from: poison, hypnosis, murder. But the evidence refuses to cooperate with those narratives. There is no poison, no drugs, no external manipulation, only belief. In the weeks that follow, the house becomes a symbol. Some see it as proof of the dangers of blind faith. Others see it as an anomaly, a freak occurrence that cannot happen again. But experts quietly disagree. They point out that what happened in Burari is not unique in structure, only in scale. Human beings are deeply susceptible to authority that presents itself as protective, especially when that authority comes wrapped in familiarity, tradition, and love. Especially when it promises certainty in a world that feels chaotic. The Chundawat family did not believe they were ending their lives. That distinction matters. They believed they were participating in a ritual that would transform them, cleanse them, and allow them to continue. The absence of suicide notes is not an oversight, it is evidence. You do not say goodbye when you believe you are coming back. The notebooks end abruptly, not with closure, but with expectation. They do not record regret. They do not reflect doubt. They do not acknowledge risk. They simply stop. That silence is their final message. Over time, the house empties. The grocery shop never reopens. The building changes hands. New families move into the area. Life in Burari resumes its rhythms, but the address lingers in public memory. People still slow down when they pass it, still lower their voices. Because the horror of Burari does not lie in violence. It lies in recognition. The recognition that nothing supernatural was required. No monster. No villain. No conspiracy. Just the slow replacement of personal judgment with absolute trust in a system that never accounted for failure. What happened in that house was not madness in the way people like to imagine madness. It was order taken too far. Discipline without doubt. Faith without boundary. The family followed the rules perfectly. And the rules were wrong. That is why the story refuses to fade. Because it does not offer comfort. It does not reassure us that this could never happen here. It offers the opposite. It asks uncomfortable questions about obedience, about tradition, about how easily care can become control when questioning is framed as betrayal. 11 people did not lose hope in Burari. They lost uncertainty. And without uncertainty, there was no space left for instinct to intervene when it mattered most. The house at C10 stands now as a quiet reminder that belief, when left unchecked, does not need cruelty to become fatal. It only needs consistency, patience, and a community that mistakes silence for safety. The tragedy of Burari is not that a family died together. It is that they believed, until the very end, that they were doing exactly what was required of them. If this story lingered in your mind, you'll find many more like it on this channel, real cases, told calmly, one detail at a time, meant to be listened to without rush. For now, let the silence return. Let the night do what it does best and rest. Good night.